I never thought the roar of the Chinese New Year parade drums outside my Tomasian window in North Beach would drown out my own daughter's screams as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. But there I was, 71 years old, standing tall in the heart of San Francisco's chaos, watching justice unfold like a plot twist from one of my old Hemingway lectures. The fog rolled in thick that February night, mixing with dragon dance smoke and firecrackers popping like gunshots, while Ella, my daughter of 45 years, lunged at me in our crowded living room, her face twisted in rage as the DNA results flashed on the big screen I'd rigged. "You bastard! You ruined everything!" she shrieked. But I just stood there, unbreakable, my voice steady as I addressed the room full of family, cops, and even a few nosy neighbors who'd wandered in from the parade. This was the explosion I'd engineered, the peak of my revenge. But to understand how a mild-mannered literature professor became an architect of calculated vengeance, you need to rewind with me to where the first domino fell. Flashback 3 months earlier, to a November morning when the fog clung to the Golden Gate like a shroud, and my world started crumbling without me even knowing it. I was sitting in my study, surrounded by 40 years of books and lecture notes from USF, sipping my third espresso and grading papers, even though I'd been retired for 2 years. Old habits die hard. The doorbell rang one of those sharp, insistent jabs that screams emergency. Ella burst through my door before I could even twist the knob fully open, her husband Thomas trailing behind with that slick real estate agent smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Dad, we need to talk," she said, but her tone wasn't concerned, it was predatory. They cornered me in my own living room, this cramped Tomasian space worth $3.2 million in San Francisco's insane market, talking about my forgetfulness and concerning behavior. I felt my chest tighten. What the hell were they talking about? "You left the stove on twice last week," Ella insisted, her manicured nails gesturing wildly. "Mrs. Chen next door said you wandered into her garden at midnight looking for Mom." Lies. All lies. I knew it in my bones, that same instinct that helped me detect plagiarism in student essays for 4 decades. Thomas chimed in, all smooth concern. "We think it's time to consider your options, Elias. Assisted living, maybe signing over power of attorney so we can help manage your affairs." There it was, the real endgame. My Tomasian, my savings, my life's work, all wrapped up with a bow for them. I played along, nodding slowly, watching them exchange that quick glance couples share when they think they're winning. But inside, my mind was racing through plot structures and character motivations like I was deconstructing a Faulkner novel. Something was off. Something had been off for months, maybe years. That afternoon, after they left with promises to help me find the right facility, I sat at my mahogany desk and started making a list. Not of my failings, but of theirs. The inconsistencies. The sudden interest in my finances after decades of distance. The way Ella had slowly isolated me from old colleagues and friends, claiming I was embarrassing at faculty dinners. Then I did something I'd been avoiding for the 6 years since my wife Margaret died in that car crash on Highway 1. I opened her old cedar hope chest, the one I'd locked away because touching her things felt like drowning. Underneath her wedding dress and photo albums, I found a lockbox I'd never seen before. My hands shook as I jimmied it open with a letter opener. Inside were letters, dozens of them yellowed with age, tied with a faded ribbon. Love letters. To Margaret. From someone named James Cordova. I read the first one, dated 1978. The year before Ella was born. My vision blurred as the words painted a picture I'd never imagined my faithful wife, my Margaret, tangled up in a months-long affair with a fellow teacher at her school. The room spun. 45 years of memories, of sacrifices, of late nights comforting Ella through nightmares and paying for her Palo Alto wedding. All of it suddenly felt like a lie written in disappearing ink. I found a photograph tucked in the last letter. Margaret and this James character at Ocean Beach, her hand on her barely visible pregnant belly, both of them glowing with a happiness I'd never quite seen in our wedding photos. The truth hit me like a cable car collision. Ella wasn't mine. Not biologically. Maybe not in any way that mattered. I sat there as the fog pressed against my windows, as the city hummed below, as my entire understanding of my life shattered like cheap glass. The woman I'd mourned for 6 years had betrayed me. The daughter I'd raised alone, Sacrificing tenure-track ambitions and research opportunities wasn't even my blood. And now she was circling like a vulture, ready to take everything I had left. That night, something hardened in me, something cold and calculated. I had spent 40 years teaching students how stories work, the setups, the reversals, the climactic confrontations. It was time to write my own ending, and trust me, it would be one hell of a plot twist. The DNA results arrived on a Tuesday morning in December, slipped under my door in a plain manila envelope while the garbage trucks rattled down Columbus Avenue. My hands trembled as I tore it open, standing there in my bathrobe, the winter sun barely breaking through the fog. 0% probability of paternity. 3 words on a clinical lab report that confirmed what Margaret's letter had already destroyed. Ella, the girl I'd rocked to sleep during earthquake tremors, the teenager I'd driven to SAT prep in daily city traffic, the woman I'd walked down the aisle at that ridiculously expensive Presidio wedding wasn't mine. Not even a little bit. I collapsed into my reading chair, the same cracked leather one where I'd graded thousands of essays about Hemingway's Lost Generation. Turns out I was the lost one all along. The grief hit in waves, each one pulling me under deeper than the last. I thought about the night Ella was born at UCSF Medical Center, how I'd paced the waiting room for 9 hours, terrified and exhilarated. I remembered her first day of kindergarten at Commodore Sloat Elementary, how she'd clung to my leg crying, and I'd promised her everything would be okay. Every memory felt poisoned now, tainted, like someone had taken a Sharpie to my life's photograph and scribbled fraud across every precious moment. But underneath the grief, something darker was brewing. Rage, pure, white-hot fury at Margaret for the deception, at Ella for existing as a living lie, at myself for being too blind to see it. Had there been signs? Moments when Ella's mannerisms didn't match mine, when her ambitions felt foreign. The self-doubt crept in like the fog through window cracks. Who was I if not Ella's father? What did 45 years of sacrifice mean if it was all built on betrayal? I spent 3 days in that chair, barely eating, watching the city lights blur through tears and whiskey. The Tomation creaked around me, each sound a reminder of what I stood to lose. On day 4, something shifted. Maybe it was my literature professor brain kicking back in, the part that had spent decades teaching students that every great protagonist faces a crucible that either breaks them or forges them into something stronger. I chose stronger. If Ella wanted to play games, I'd show her what 40 years of studying plot structure and character motivation could do. Time to turn this tragedy into a thriller. But first I needed intel. Real information, not just emotional devastation. I reached out to Mia Chen, one of my former students from my SF State adjunct days, now a family law attorney with an office in the financial district. We met at Café Trieste in North Beach, where the espresso machine hissed like a steam engine and old Italian men argued about soccer. "Professor Hawthorne," she said, sliding into the booth across from me, concern etched across her face. "You look terrible." "I feel worse," I admitted. "But I need your help, Mia. Legally, what am I dealing with here?" I laid it all out, the forged power of attorney attempts, Ella's claims about my mental state, Thomas's predatory circling around my property. Mia's expression hardened with each detail. "This is elder abuse," she said flatly. "Financial exploitation, possibly fraud. If they're fabricating medical concerns, that's defamation at minimum." She leaned forward. "But here's the thing, Professor. You need evidence. Solid, undeniable proof of their intentions." "I'm working on it," I said, though I had no idea how. That's when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Grandpa Elias?" The voice was young, male, shaking. "It's Alex, Ella's son. We need to talk." My heart stopped. Alex, 22 years old, studying computer science at UC Berkeley, Ella's golden child who I'd helped pay for when Thomas's real estate deals went south. I hadn't spoken to him in months. Ella had been keeping him busy with finals. "Alex, what's going on?" "Not on the phone," he said quickly. "Can you meet me? Somewhere Mom won't see us?" An hour later, I was sitting on a bench at Crissy Field, the Golden Gate Bridge looming orange through the mist, watching Alex pace in front of me like a caged animal. The kid looked wrecked, dark circles under his eyes, hoodie pulled up despite the cold not being that bad. "I can't do this anymore," he finally said, stopping to face me. "What Mom's doing to you, what she's planning, it's wrong. It's so wrong." He pulled out his phone, hands shaking worse than mine had been lately. "I've been recording their conversations. Mom and Dad, late at night when they think I'm asleep. They're planning to have you declared incompetent, to claim you're a danger to yourself. They've already talked to a judge, greased some palms." The words hit like physical blows, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Why are you telling me this, Alex?" His eyes filled with tears. "Because you're the only one who ever gave a damn about me, Grandpa. When Dad left for 6 months with that woman in L.A., when Mom was too busy with her boutique to notice I existed, you were there. You taught me to read Steinbeck, took me to Giants games, believed in me." He thrust his phone toward me. "Take it. I've got everything backed up. Every conversation, every plan, every lie they've told about you." I took the phone with trembling hands, scrolling through dozens of audio files, each one labeled with dates and brief descriptions. This was it. This was the ammunition I needed. But more than that, sitting there with this kid who'd betrayed his own parents to protect me, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Purpose. The rage was still there, but now it had direction. "Alex," I said quietly, "you just started a war." He nodded, wiping his eyes. "Good. Let's finish it." Armed with Alex's recordings and a fire in my gut that hadn't burned this hot since my dissertation defense in 1982, I transformed myself into the greatest role I'd ever played. Confused, declining, vulnerable Elias Hawthorne. Oscar-worthy stuff. The performance started small. I began leaving the front door unlocked, muttering about Margaret coming home from the grocery store. Ella would find me standing at the window, watching for a woman who'd been dead 6 years, and I'd catch that flash of satisfaction in her eyes before she masked it with fake concern. "Dad, you can't keep doing this," she'd say, her hand on my shoulder like a vice. "What if someone breaks in?" "Break in?" I'd respond, my voice trembling just right. "But Margaret has her key." Perfect. Each incident, each confused moment, I made sure Thomas was there to witness it, made sure they felt confident, made sure they thought they were winning. But here's what they didn't know. Every stumble was choreographed. Every forgotten name was strategic. And hidden in my study, behind a false panel I'd installed myself during a weekend they thought I was at a senior center social, was a recording system that would make the NSA jealous. Alex had taught me how to set it up. We'd met 3 times at Ocean Beach, walking along the surf where the roar of waves covered our conversations. The kid was a tech genius, wiring my entire house with pinhole cameras and voice-activated recorders disguised as smoke detectors. "Grandpa, you're like a spy," he'd said during our last meeting, a hint of admiration breaking through his guilt. "Professor turned secret agent." "I prefer to think of it as method acting," I'd replied, and we'd both laughed, brief, bitter laughter that tasted like salt spray and revenge. By January, when the Beta Breakers preparation started flooding the city with energy, I'd collected dozens of recordings. Ella and Thomas didn't disappoint. Late-night conversations about which retirement home was cheapest, arguments about whether to sell my Tomasian outright or rent it to tech workers for $8,000 a month, discussions of how to access my retirement accounts once they had control. The smoking gun came on a foggy Tuesday night. I was supposedly asleep upstairs, but I was actually in my study monitoring the live feed as they sat in my own living room plotting my downfall. "The intervention is set for Chinese New Year," Thomas said, pouring himself my expensive scotch like he already owned the place. "The lawyers say with the documented incidents, the judge will grant us emergency conservatorship within 48 hours. Ella laughed. Cold, heartless. "And that stupid old man has no idea. He actually thinks we care." That's when she said the thing that made my blood freeze and boil simultaneously. "You know what the funny part is? He's not even my real father. My mom told me before she died. Some professor named James Cordova knocked her up, and Elias was too stupid to figure it out. I've been playing loving daughter to a mark for 45 years. She'd known. She'd known all along." The rage that crashed through me was biblical, but I couldn't let it show. Not yet. I sat there in the dark, trembling, watching them toast to their upcoming payday with my scotch, and I let the pain wash over me one more time. All those memories reading her Goodnight Moon during earthquake aftershocks, teaching her to drive stick shift on the hills of San Francisco, crying together at Margaret's funeral at Holy Cross Cemetery. She'd been faking it the entire time. Every hug, every "I love you, Dad," every moment I'd treasured had been a performance. But two could play at theater, and I'd been teaching dramatic literature for 4 decades. The next morning I called Ella with a voice full of excitement that wasn't entirely fake. "Honey, I've been meaning to tell you something. I met with some investors last month before all this confusion started, and they want to put money into a tech startup I'm consulting for." I could practically hear her pupils turn into dollar signs over the phone. "Tech startup? Dad, that's wonderful. Tell me more." Hook, line, and sinker. With Mia's help, I'd created an elaborate fake investment opportunity. Documents that looked official, a shell company with a sleek website, projected returns that seemed too good to be true because they absolutely were. The bait was $250,000 of my money supposedly already invested, with another $500,000 available once the right paperwork was signed. They couldn't resist. Within a week, Ella and Thomas were in my study, documents spread across my desk, trying to get me to sign power of attorney so they could protect my investment and maximize returns. "Just sign here, Dad," Ella cooed, pointing to the line with her perfectly manicured nail. "We'll handle everything. You don't need to worry about these complicated financial matters." I made my hand shake as I signed, made my signature wobbly and uncertain, but what they didn't notice was Alex in the doorway, phone in hand, recording everything. What they didn't see was the tiny addendum in the fine print that actually signed over nothing, drafted by Mia to be completely unenforceable. They thought they'd won. They actually hugged each other after I forgot they were still there and wandered to the kitchen muttering about tea. But the real masterstroke was still coming, because while they were focused on my money, I was building my case. Every forged signature, every fraudulent document, every conversation about exploiting a vulnerable senior, it was all recorded, time-stamped, and backed up in 3 separate locations. The nights were the hardest, though. When the performance ended and I was alone in my bedroom, staring at the ceiling, the weight of it all would crush down. I'd think about Ella at 6 years old, gap-toothed and giggling, about teaching her to ride a bike in Golden Gate Park, about the pride I'd felt at her college graduation. Were any of those moments real? Did she ever love me, even a little? Or was I just the fool who paid the bills while she laughed behind my back? Some nights I'd pace the curved streets of Russian Hill, walking off the pain until my legs ached and the fog soaked through my jacket. Other nights I'd sit in my reading chair with Margaret's photo, asking her ghost why she'd condemned me to this hell. But every morning I'd wake up with purpose, because revenge, I was learning, is its own kind of fuel. By February, everything was in place. The intervention was scheduled for the night of the Chinese New Year celebration, exactly as they'd planned. They thought they were setting a trap for me. They had no idea I'd been setting one for them all along. The night of February 8th arrived with the kind of electric energy only San Francisco can manufacture. Outside my Thomasian windows, the Chinese New Year parade was building momentum dragon dancers weaving through crowds, drums pounding like war beats, firecrackers popping in rapid succession that sounded eerily like gunshots. Inside my living room, a different kind of explosion was about to detonate. They'd all gathered for what they thought was my intervention. Ella and Thomas sat front and center on my vintage couch, playing concerned family. Behind them, a handful of their carefully selected witnesses, Ella's business partner, Claire, Thomas's brother who'd barely spoken to me in 20 years, even old Mrs. Patterson from next door, who they'd convinced I was losing my mind. What they didn't know was that Mia had arranged for 3 plainclothes police officers to be positioned outside. What they couldn't see was Alex hiding in the kitchen, phone ready. What they'd never suspected was the projector I'd set up behind my bookshelf, aimed at the bare wall above the fireplace. "Dad," Ella started, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We're all here because we love you and we're worried. These episodes you've been having—" "Episodes?" I interrupted, my voice suddenly sharp as a blade. The room went silent. "You mean the performance I've been giving?" Her face flickered with confusion. Thomas leaned forward. "Elias, this is exactly what we're talking about. The confusion, the paranoia." Shut up, Thomas. My voice cut through the room like ice. For once in your miserable life, shut your mouth and watch. I pulled out the remote. The projector hummed to life. Margaret's letter appeared on the wall, 10 feet tall, impossible to ignore. I watched Ella's face drain of color as I read aloud, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. Elias, forgive me. Ella isn't yours. She's from my affair with James Cordova. I couldn't break your heart. The room erupted. Claire gasped. Mrs. Patterson looked like she might faint. But Ella's face twisted into something I'd never seen before. Pure, animal rage. You bastard, she hissed. Oh, I'm just getting started. Click. The DNA results appeared. 0% probability of paternity in cold, clinical black and white. 45 years, Ella. 45 years of me sacrificing everything, my research, my career opportunities, my peace of mind for a daughter who wasn't even mine. You had no right. She was on her feet now, shaking. No, right? I laughed, and it came out harsh and broken. I had every right. You see, I might have forgiven the lie. I might have forgiven Margaret's betrayal. But this? Click. Audio played through speakers I'd hidden behind the curtains. Ella's voice, cold and clear. He's not even my real father. I've been playing loving daughter to a mark for 45 years. The room went deadly silent except for the distant parade drums. Everyone turned to stare at Ella. Her face crumbled, then rebuilt itself into fury. You recorded us? In your own home? My home, I said quietly, which you were planning to steal. Let's continue, shall we? The next clips played. Ella and Thomas discussing the conservatorship, planning which retirement home was cheapest, laughing about the stupid old man. Every damning word broadcast to the room of people they'd brought as witnesses. Thomas jumped up. This is insane. He's clearly having some kind of senile breakdown. Actually, a voice called from the kitchen doorway, Grandpa's the sanest person in this room. Alex stepped out, phone held high, still recording. Ella whirled on him like a snake. Alex? What are you doing? What you should have done years ago, Mom. Telling the truth. His voice cracked. I gave Grandpa everything. Every recording, every plan, every lie you told. Because unlike you, I actually love him. You little traitor, Ella lunged toward Alex, but I stepped between them with a speed that surprised even me. Touch him, I said softly, and it'll be the last thing you do. That's when she lunged at me instead, hands outstretched, face twisted in rage, screaming obscenities that echoed off the walls. I sidestepped 71 years old, but still quick enough, and she crashed into the bookshelf behind me. The front door burst open. 3 officers flooded in, badges out. San Francisco Police. Nobody move. Thomas tried to run, made it exactly 4 steps before an officer had him face down on my Persian rug. Ella was screaming, crying, cursing, all at once as another officer calmly read her rights. But wait, I said, enjoying this more than I probably should have. There's one more twist. I pulled out a pill bottle from my pocket. You remember last week when I had that heart attack and the paramedics came? The ones who found sedatives in my system that I supposedly took by accident due to my dementia? Ella's face went white. Turns out those paramedics were very thorough. They found this bottle hidden in my bathroom, prescription in your name, Thomas, from a doctor you paid off. You were planning to use it to have me committed. Instead, it's evidence of attempted elder abuse and conspiracy. Thomas stopped struggling. Just lay there on my floor, defeated. Class dismissed, I said, and despite everything I almost smiled. You both get an F in fraud. As the officers cuffed them both, reading off charges that included conspiracy, elder abuse, attempted fraud, and forgery, Ella looked at me one last time. The rage was gone. Now she just looked broken. Dad, she whispered, tears streaming. I was scared. After my real father abandoned my mom, abandoned me before I was even born, I never felt secure. I thought, you thought money would fix it. My voice cracked despite my best efforts. You thought taking everything from the man who actually raised you, who actually loved you, would fill that hole. I'm sorry. No, you're not. You're sorry you got caught. They dragged her out past Mrs. Patterson, past Claire, past all the witnesses who'd come to watch me be declared incompetent. The parade drums reached a crescendo outside, fireworks exploding over the bay, and my daughter, not my daughter, disappeared into a police car parked under the streetlights. I stood there in my living room, surrounded by the wreckage of my family, and for the first time in 3 months, I could breathe. 6 months later, I stood on the rooftop deck of my Thomasian at sunset, watching the fog roll over Twin Peaks like a silk curtain being drawn across the stage of my life. The city spread out before me, glittering, chaotic, beautiful, and for the first time since I'd found those letters, I felt something that resembled peace. My living room below me was packed with people, not family, not by blood anyway, but chosen family, real family, the kind that shows up when it matters. The trial had been swift and brutal. Ella and Thomas both took plea deals to avoid worse charges, 3 years each for conspiracy to commit elder abuse, fraud, and attempted theft. Their fancy Marin County dreams collapsed into concrete cells in San Bruno. Thomas's real estate license was revoked. Ella's boutique closed within a month. I should have felt more satisfaction, but mostly I just felt tired. Tired and strangely free. The house was mine, protected by an ironclad will that Mia had helped me rewrite. Every document Ella and Thomas had forged was void. Every scheme they'd built crumbled like sandcastles at Ocean Beach when the tide comes in. But the real Thomasy wasn't keeping my property. It was what I'd chosen to do with it. The Margaret Hawthorne Literary Scholarship. I'd named it after my late wife, not because she deserved the honor, but because I'd decided to reclaim that name, to make it mean something good instead of letting it remain poisoned by betrayal. The scholarship funded students from underprivileged San Francisco neighborhoods who wanted to study literature kids who reminded me of why I'd become a professor in the first place. Alex was the first recipient, not because he needed the money, but because he'd earned it. The kid had transferred to USF to be closer to me, switching his major to English with a minor in computer science. "Best of both worlds, Grandpa," he'd said, grinning. "Tech skills to pay the bills, literature to feed the soul." We met 3 mornings a week at Dolores Park, sitting on a bench overlooking the city with paper cups of Blue Bottle coffee, discussing Faulkner and Fitzgerald while joggers and dog walkers passed by. Sometimes we'd argue about whether Hemingway was overrated. Sometimes we'd just sit in comfortable silence, watching the fog burn off. "You ever regret it?" Alex asked one morning in May. "Not forgiving her? My mom, I mean." I thought about it, really thought about it. "I forgave her," I said finally. "Not for her sake, for mine. Carrying that rage around was like drinking poison and expecting her to die. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. She made her choices. Now she lives with them." Alex nodded slowly. "And me? Do you forgive me for not telling you sooner?" I looked at this kid, this brave, loyal, principled young man who'd risked everything to do the right thing, and felt my chest tighten with pride. "Alex, you're the only one who doesn't need forgiving. You saved my life. More than that, you restored my faith that family can mean something real." His eyes got wet, and he looked away quickly, embarrassed. "You're the only real grandfather I've ever had." "Blood doesn't make family," I said. "Love does. Choice does. Showing up when it's hard, that's what makes family." By summer, the house had transformed. The first floor became the Hawthorne Literary Center, a community space hosting free writing workshops, poetry readings, and book clubs. My old study was now a cozy library where neighborhood kids could come read after school. The upstairs remained my private space, but even that felt more alive than it had in years. On opening night, 50 people crammed into my living room for the inaugural reading, local poets, USF students, even a few of my old teaching colleagues who'd come out of the woodwork. Mrs. Patterson from next door brought cookies. Mia brought champagne. Alex set up a microphone system that actually worked. I stood in front of them all, these strangers who were becoming friends, and read from my favorite passage of A Farewell to Arms. My voice shook a little, but it was strong. After 40 years of teaching, I'd forgotten how much I loved just sharing stories with people who cared. To New Beginnings, Mia toasted afterward, raising her glass, and to Elias Hawthorne, who proved you're never too old to fight back. "Or to start over," I added, clinking my glass against hers. The center became my new purpose. 3 days a week, I taught free workshops, fiction writing on Tuesdays, poetry on Thursdays, memoir writing on Saturdays. The rest of the time, I lived, really lived. I took walks along the Embarcadero, caught Giants games with Alex, started dating a retired librarian named Patricia who made me laugh and didn't need anything from me except companionship. At 71, I discovered something most people never figure out. Success isn't about the house you own or the money you save or even the family you're born into. Success is about dignity, about refusing to let anyone, not your wife, not your daughter, not anyone steal your sense of self. One afternoon in October, sitting on my deck with the city sprawling golden in the autumn light, Alex asked me what I'd learned from everything that happened. That underestimating an old literature professor is a really bad plot, I said, and we both laughed. But seriously, I learned that pain can either break you or forge you. I chose to be forged. Any regrets? He asked. I thought about Ella in prison, about Margaret's betrayal, about 45 years of sacrifice based on a lie. And then I looked around at what I'd built from the ashes, the center, the scholarship, the community, the peace. Not a single one, I said. This, right here, right now, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Life at 71 wasn't ending. It was just beginning. And this time I was writing my own story. If you've faced betrayal, if you've been underestimated, if someone tried to take what's yours, fight back. Document everything. Trust your instincts. And remember, family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when the world tries to break you. Now go write your own ending.
Revenge never ends. It only waits.